So, Mixel, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, James.
Yeah, you got in touch recently about, well, pre-COVID actually, about getting together for a conversation. COVID arrived, we've been busy, and then said let's get together now instead. So maybe you want to jump in and just give me a bit of background about you and about the reason why you got in touch for the call today.
Yeah, so I guess we both have a passion to scale Agile. We've been doing it both in a very different environment. There's some overlap, of course, because it's Agile links to software development, so there's always the link. But it seems useful to start bringing those experiences together. So I came from a research background on complex adaptive systems, on cognition, on artificial intelligence. And I've focused on understanding how platforms create collective intelligence. That's basically my angle to it. So maybe you explain a little bit your angle. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Well, my background was coming more from the people side and the relational side. So around my mid-20s, I had a bit of an epiphany that I needed to do something more meaningful than what I was in my life. And I got into working with young people, originally volunteering and then primarily working with at-risk teenagers. So I ended up involved in that for about a decade. I was particularly interested in some of the underlying elements that contributed to the situations that these young people were facing. So looking at the social side of things, looking at communication, looking at the kind of generational background of these kids within the social context. It was my opinion that these kids were like canaries in the coal mine, that many of them were just kind of sounding the alarm that something was wrong or missing. So that led me down a path where really I was just orientating by wanting to contribute something meaningful to the world and listening out for where I was invited in that. And when I found resonance following it, and cut a long story short, here I am today talking to you and a co-developer of Sociocracy 3.0. This pattern-based approach for organizational development.
Yeah, I understand that with the kids, you've been using voice dialogue, right?
Well, in years past, yeah. So voice dialogue, psychology of selves, that was really what preceded my epiphany, because I got into some personal work. I had some voice dialogue sessions. I realized that what I thought I was only a fragment of what I was, and even that was kind of distorted and biased somehow. And so I did quite a deep dive for a few years into myself. It was quite an indulgent period, but also really fascinating to understand so much. There was so much more to me than I'd realized, and so much that I would fight to the death to preserve that wasn't really me. So it was a period of integration. And that, I would say to this day, Helen Sidra Stone's work, Hal passed away recently, the psychology of selves and the aware ego process was very much, and still underpins very much, my thinking around, today organizational development, but on a deeper level, human relationships and the whole business of coming together to cooperate to achieve outcomes that are greater than the sum of our parts.
Yeah, it's also, I just noticed that there's another link between us because we've been both focusing on kids for a while. I started as a programmer, of course, but I quickly got picked up by the business school to teach the business students about the complexity about software development. And they had troubles trying to get them motivated because they were just giving them a classical course of programming in a terrible language, and they were not motivated at all. And so they allowed me with my understanding of Agile, and so I was participating at that time in the Drupal business ecosystem. But I've been using it as a living lab to take things to my course. And so I wrapped it up as an entrepreneur course. And of course, business students really love entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And it took me 2 years to optimize it. But as of the third year, my best students start creating their own business. So, which was disruptive for the university. So I got in trouble there. But it's kind of, I really enjoyed trying to get to that extrinsic motivation, to intrinsic motivation, to get them to really go to the consciousness and the awareness and the love for the topic.
Yeah.
But now I'm applying it to my kids. So
it's interesting. So, and for a period of years, I was working around, it was a potential orientated approach to education. So rather than seeing kids as empty containers that need filling up with the right content, it was helping kids to look within and see what motivated them, what inspired them, what was meaningful to them. So as you say, to connect to that, like, it's not just intrinsic motivation, right? Because there's extrinsic motivation that draws them out, but by connecting those two, then just seeing the extraordinary potential that these kids could then manifest. And, you know, for a period of time, we were working with kids who statistically were the most likely to suffer some kind of social exclusion, usually. And the turnaround in these kids from nothing more than mirroring them back to themselves and inviting them to inquire into what it was that had meaning for them was absolutely profound. So it sounds like, again, a bit of an overlap, really, just a different context, same underlying principles.
Yeah.
And you were telling me about your PhD now.
Yeah, because I mean the thing you mentioned as so the interface between the habitual and the new, that's basically where I put my teeth in for my research. So we started late 90s on what is called artificial life simulations. So you create an environment, a complex adaptive environment, and you try to simulate agents. That's the thing you try to do. But you do that to try and understand some kind of cognition, right? And so we set up a pretty ambitious project. Like, is it possible for an agent to do a creative act? That was a setting. So we wanted to investigate that. And we came out like what is called an antithesis. So we proved kind of what it could be, but that you cannot do it with simulations. So because it depends on embodiment. And if you go to robots or you go to simulations, everything is basically simplified because of computational limits. So then I decided, like, okay, but you know, we've got some very fascinating feedback system about creativity. Can't we use it in a different way? So instead of creating the agents and then letting the interactions go, could you actually work with real people and hold on to the interaction? So create a platform where they can live in, can work in. And so around that time, the art of hosting was getting popular, and Agile, of course, was getting popular. I've noticed, so now I'm talking about 2005 specific in Belgium, I've noticed that a lot of people who were capable of working Agile, digital nomads and so on, they start meeting more together locally. And I was fascinated, like bar camps. So I was fascinated, why are they getting together more while they can do everything globally? And then the focus came to the platforms. So instead of making algorithms, trying to make the platforms and see how the coordination is working. And why is a real event a different platform that has some different abilities for creativity than all the things they have online? So that was a little bit, I hope that's...
Yeah, so these weren't just virtual platforms, and they were also they were physical meeting places.
Yeah, a medium, right? I mean, afterwards, I mean, I've learned about McLuhan and the media theory. Like, the medium is a message that you understand. If you create something like an event, an open space event, then that open space event itself will actually decide how it will be creative.
Yeah. Wow. And any conclusions at this point?
Many. And I actually did some experiments with it as well. So first of all, I've been involved in the Drupal business ecosystem. So what I've noticed is that compared to some other content management systems, there was this interesting situation where the founder wasn't allowed to create his own company, which was kind of unique because then it was distributed. So the power was distributed. So, so what happened is the whole thing started up as an ecosystem. So it's about a dozen startups. And when I organized the conference in Brussels, it was 2006. I've noticed that they just came together and did open innovation, and I was like, huh? How efficient can it be like that? So I start interviewing all of the companies to try and understand why do they do open innovation. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, first I ask them, then they say like, what is open innovation? I explain them open innovation. They say it's a bad idea. We're never going to do that. While they were doing it. So then we digged in to understand why are you doing it? Mm-hmm. And it all related to the open data, showing the talent they have and the way they were selling themselves to the clients in a distributed way. So they just said to the client, yeah, we can do it, but they could only do like 50% of the project. But in the open ecosystem, they could just collaborate with the developers out there. But the good developers were always part of other other startups. So then the business owners start talking to each other. So it was purely self-organizing innovation.
Yeah.
And if you want, I can send you a paper I've had for innovation conference on it.
Yeah, but I'm fascinated they didn't recognize it as being that until you named it. Or what did they do? Did they stop then?
Well, it's a fascinating point. What you see that and it kind of links to what we see today with all that echo chambers, bubble thinking, polarizations you see happening at the moment. It's that there's a lot of things happening intuitively based on the culture that they are not aware of. And sometimes those things work without them actually understanding why they work. And sometimes things go really wrong and they cannot handle it because they don't understand the system they are in. That's what it is. Yeah. I mean, I've tried to explain them what a dissipative system is, but that's something from thermodynamics about self-organization. That one of the biggest challenges I experience is that a lot of my conceptualization comes from hard sciences. And most people I'm in now in the more human environment don't have those knowledge, but they have it intuitively. And there's like, you get lost in translation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so actually just building those shared mental models is how we've been referring to it. It's important because otherwise it's difficult to communicate at all. And that includes concepts, language.
Yeah.
And you said...
You mentioned that actually in some of your talks that communication is hard, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen what you've been doing with S3. I'm impressed. I mean, I really understand how the patterns allow for language to emerge. And I'm really knowing how it works and then seeing it actually in a language people can understand. That's two very different challenges. And I think S3 is really doing a job doing that. Like getting some of the things like distributed mindset into the design itself.
It's an enormous piece of work, actually. We've written less and less over the years. I mean, we wrote more and we've been reducing it and refining it and reducing it and refining it. At some point, we need to turn around and go the other way. But there was so much incoherence in our apparently obvious narrative of what we were communicating to others, and then learn through the lack of capacity for people to grasp an ounce of what we were saying, that it was less coherent than we thought. So, so that's been the first obstacle, especially because S3 is relevant in just about every conceivable context you could imagine. People come to it from all angles, so you can't even rely on a kind of subculture of preferred language and terms, because that's only going to work within a certain context. So working within tech, for example, we build up all of our narrative for people who have that background. That's not going to make a lot of sense for people coming from another context. And it might even be polarizing and vice versa. So how do you present these things in a manner that sort of transcends the binary worldview of people so that it's approachable from all angles? These are just some of the issues we bumped into.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Because you asked about lessons learned.
Conclusions, insights that you've had so far from this research.
Well, the thing is that when I was doing the research between 2006 and 2012, the whole idea of corporate wasn't on the radar at all. So I wasn't looking at corporates. But the thing is that in 2009, the ecosystem matured. So, and they went what we call the incubation phase. They went into a growth phase. And that's also the moment that the founder created his own company. So his company never was part of the innovative part of the community. It only was part of the growth phase of the community. And they became like the gateway to corporates. But then something very strange happened to the ecosystem. Like I said, I interviewed all of the startups who made the ecosystem, but it's the most creative one who left the first. And I can really call them by name. They were called Development Seed.
No, I was just acknowledging, right?
Yeah. And so later on, I understand that if you go into biology, it's called the tropical cascade. So if you go into biology, they see barren landscapes, and now they've learned that there are these key species. And if they introduce the key species, and it sounds controversial, like Yellowstone, they reintroduced the wolves.
Yeah.
But by reintroducing the wolves, it actually allowed to optimize what we call the essential variable in the ecosystem. And it went from a barren landscape that it's now with the coyotes, it went to a rich ecosystem again. Even the rivers start becoming stronger. So the roots around the rivers, but that's, you can understand it if you see the tropical cascade. So one of the things I've been learning is that agile, when it happens in some like niche of ecosystem, it can grow there. But once it becomes juicy enough for the corporates to start looking at it, there needs to be another dynamic. And then you really need to get that agile at scale. And if you get to the agile at scale, you get into a whole different environment where they are trying to understand how to do that. But there I don't see any of the relations I have with the complex adaptive systems.
Right.
So,
and if you think back over examples of where you've seen this happen, what are some of the preconditions that would need to be in place for that that movement towards the corporate? And secondly, then what specific, I don't know how to put it eloquently, things need to happen then for that kind of integration of more agile mindset into that side of business to occur?
Okay, see if I can get those two questions right.
Yeah, so the conditions and the actual, like the tangible things that then need to happen. Okay,
look, the easy but wrong first impression was the culture of corporates need to change, but that's not by definition possible. But because the way, if you see, I actually have a video on the whole how digital wolf changed digital rivers. I can give you the link later on, where I try to explain that what corporates try to attract are followers. While if I show you in the ecosystem the real power behind the ecosystem, they are totally not what people expect. They are not young people. They are not dynamic, creative guys. And it's kind of the opposite. The talented developers are old, stubborn guys who don't want to change at all, who are capable of changing every conversation you get into them in 5 minutes to their topic. And that shows their passion for the thing they're working with. Like there was this guy on multilingual, and I've really tried to have a conversation with him on another topic more than 5 minutes was impossible. So every time again I would walk, and before we know it, we were talking about a language issue in it's kind of, but it's the beauty of them as well. And what the entrepreneurs in the ecosystem knew, because it's a rough jungle, right? What they knew is that if they could actually provide that stubborn person with the surroundings to capitalize on them, they had a competitive advantage. And then you get into the strategy management because they had a competitive advantage, hard to trade, and they were in business. But then you see the corporates coming in, and that whole game doesn't matter anymore because they can just go over it with huge amount of people, throwing a huge amount of resources against it. So we actually tried what you could call a flight ahead. That was 2012 when I went to Hebei trying to work on food security. Mm-hmm. and build a whole city where we would actually need a startup ecosystem at a huge scale. And when I was talking with the Chinese diplomats around it, I was surprised that they understood quite a lot about collective intelligence. And I understood that there is something intuitive in their culture that makes collective thinking and platform thinking natural. So, and it means if you go, I know a lot of people who look at China and say like, well, Facebook and Google, it's not allowed there. But I look at it differently. I see that they really understand the value of the platforms, and therefore they create the platforms themselves. So you see and I've noticed that it links to their culture, that they were capable of asking questions I'm normally not getting from my peers.
Yeah. So you're saying building the environment, so kind of creating a space for emergence into that helps those people to transition if that.
You're getting close.
Coherent for them in terms of the objectives that they're pursuing from that.
Yeah. So now I turn it around, because now I look at what is the culture that you have in front of you. And if you can do the delta from their culture and see where they want to go to, you can help from out of their own belly, try to understand how they can move forward. So yeah, I think it's you made a good, a more comprehensible thing of what I'm trying to say. So.
Right. Well, I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody who's also writing a thesis right now on, I think, self-management. And one of the questions she asked me was, I paraphrased, but it was something along the lines of, do you think you should lead with changing culture? And I think that's it's a two kind of binary question in a way, because if you just focus on culture, then you can miss the underlying issues that led to the culture to start with somehow, or at least that perpetuated. So we were kind of looking at the two sides of intentionally seeking to evolve culture somehow, but also looking practically at the processes and practices that you have in place, and how you can, in a way, facilitate transformation either way. But a precursor is becoming conscious of what you've got, whether that's processes and tools or culture, and by making that conscious, creating some disidentification for people so that they can actually see it. And by disidentifying, that brings them closer to other options that can then be integrated to create a more kind of integral approach to whatever they're doing, whether that's tools, practices, or culture. But my reflection yesterday, there was really an insight, as I was saying, it was that you can go either way, provided that precondition is in place. So if people recognize value in changing processes and tools, and decide to invest the time and energy required to unlearn old patterns and learn new ones, then that in itself will lead to transformation in culture. And alternatively, if they decide to focus more on communication, relationship, and how they coexist within the wider environment, that will lead to insights around the need for changes or evolution of practices and tools that people
use. But then that requires the drive first, right?
Well, I mean, if you bring in the S3 element,
just general drive.
Our presupposition. I know driver isn't a great term when you're talking in the world of complexity, because people tend to lump that into the world of complicated. But in the way we mean drive, the driver as in the I'm distracted thinking about what I was reading of Dave Snowden recently. He spoke about drivers as the language of complicated, and modulators is the term he's using in the realm of complexity. But anyway, I mean, that's a side topic.
Look it up.
Yeah, but
the thing, what you mentioned about the disidentify, I hope I got that right. So you mean?
Yeah, so tell me what you thought you understood, and let's see.
Well, maybe I'm projecting it too much on the experiments I've did with it. I actually been in creating workshops where we bring up the collective unconsciousness of a group.
Mm-hmm.
And it works really well with scale-ups. So that's startups that's proven their value in the market and now are growing, and they get these grow issues. But the thing is, they don't have peers to steal from,
Mm-hmm.
to learn from,
Yeah.
right? Because they are the scale up,
Yeah.
right? But I've been in a few of them and allow them to understand that the answer is in themselves. They are the answer. By instead of avoiding tension, bringing the tension to the surface so we can get the collective unconsciousness to the surface. And then when you mentioned this identify, I was trying to understand how did that work in the group? Because there's of course one person who raises an issue, who spreads the idea, but then at the same time, it's not about him or her, it's about the issue in the group. Is it this way you were?
Well, let me see, because there's a few different strands. Okay. See if I can pull them together in one way at least. So I was explaining about the concept of driver. So, a hypothesis could be that our preferred state is unconsciousness. And I heard, I think it was, I forget now who said it. That consciousness is an error detect, and Jordan Peterson. Consciousness is an error detect and rectification system. I thought that was quite a nice way of putting it. That we're kind of perceiving dissonance with our expectations and the environment we would desire. And when something appears different to what we expect or wish to see, we experience some inner state of alarm, which could be more positive, like an attraction, or more like negative, like some kind of impediment we want to move away from. And assuming there's no secondary gain to keeping that out of consciousness, then we're inclined to at least make a determination about some kind of action or inaction that would lead to the potential of the future we would hope to see somehow, right? So this is...
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. You're mentioning two things that are so extremely related. And I would love to suggest you to read a book called On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins, because the thing that Jordan Peterson is doing there with understanding it also relates to hierarchies. And I know that Jordan is being pretty bashed on to look at hierarchies of lobsters, right?
Yeah. I think it was a bit unfortunate as a kind of foundation point,
but it's purely mathematically. It goes deeper. I mean, hierarchy and complexity. I mean, I've noticed a lot of people think that to navigate complexity you have to decentralize, but that's a limited view.
Yeah,
if you go and look into the brains, you see hierarchies everywhere. If you go into nature, you see hierarchies everywhere. But those are like sense-making hierarchies.
Yeah.
And that's the essence. So how do you create a platform, a system that can actually aggregate, becomes a hierarchy of sense-making? And so if you look in On Intelligence, it's about a study about your visual cortex. But the way it is actually described is that it's a complex system capable of anticipating. So it's basically the hierarchy allows the system to start doing anticipation. And that's like almost purely mathematical. So it's even older than lobsters.
Yeah. Is it all intelligence, you said?
On Intelligence by On Intelligence and Jeff Hawkins, but I'll send you the links.
Send me the link. That would be great.
It was a book that's been circulating heavily in the research group. So the research group I'm involved with is Evolution, Complexity, and Cognition, but we also have the Global Brain Institute. So those are the things we worked on. And I know that book on Intelligence, everyone can read it. It's a very readable book. But all of them loved it because it made it so simply. See, it was so simplifying something so complex.
Yeah, that's what I need. So something simple that that's easy to absorb. But so I was trying to tie those strings together, right? And I was talking about drivers, and I was talking about the navigating by attention and our natural predisposition to observe dissonance in our environment, and then determine what if any, response would be appropriate. And this is really at the heart of S3, right? So the concept driver was really a way of trying to describe that relationship between the perception of a situation that's occurring in a context that matters to the perceiver, right? So it's like a relationship between context, perception of event, not the event itself, because God only knows what's really happening, and the relevance of that to the person who perceives it. And so that's like very much at the heart of S3. And so on the one hand, this question of what's real, I think, is useful. We see this practically when people are bringing clarifying drivers and describing, or respond to organizational drivers and describing organizational drivers, because it's not something new, but it's saying, okay, instead of just acting automatically, pause in moments when it might be relevant and pay attention to what you're observing and the assumptions you're making about what you're observing and your determinations about what might be needed in that context, i.e. what's deficit in the system somehow, and see how that then informs your action, whatever that might be, and take time to check both of those all three of those parameters. Actually, there's your perception of what's happening. Is it really like that? And why it matters, is that really something that matters, or is it different to what you imagine? And what is it that you think might be needed? Because that's a pretty broad scope of subjective opinion very often. And then what is it that you're actually doing about that? And checking coherence around all three of those. And primarily in anything other than a kind of clear situation, checking with peers about that and getting feedback, because very often you're going to find someone else's perception of something is different to yours. Their assumptions about what's needed is different to yours, and their approach for dealing with that will be different to yours as well. So creating synergies between these different perspectives and opinions and approaches helps to build a more kind of high resolution, more granular, rich, more true understanding of what's happening, and potentially more appropriate way of responding to it. So that in itself is bringing consciousness to people's previous unconscious presuppositions and habitual ways of doing things, right? So that's one aspect of the disidentification I was talking about. And then we were talking about culture, these processes and tools, right? And sometimes in an intervention with an organization, you might, or with an individual, you might focus on culture, but other times you might focus on process and tools. And it's not an either-or question, and both paths are going to lead to transformation of both, provided that, one, there's a wish to venture on that journey somehow, and there's not a secondary reason to avoid it. And secondly, that whichever side of that coin you come down on is appropriate to the context. Because some people, they never want to talk about relationship or communication, or but they've got some hard problems with their work in being able to deliver value, and they want to look at processes and tools all day long. So that's a great route.
I guess I come from that culture.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm an engineer. I mean, I build stuff. Right?
The first question, or the first intervention, isn't what you should do. The first intervention is, what are you doing? What works and what doesn't, right? And then let's look at what isn't working and where you're prepared to concede that something else might be valuable. And then we can look at what alternatives might be there that are resonant with your expectations and your willingness to try. Yeah. And I think that's the same whether you're on the culture side in more kind of soft interventions or more tangible interventions on the process and tools side. And both of those journeys are a humanistic way of inviting disidentification from current, what would you say? It's like getting out your own box, basically. It's like, but if you say to somebody, get out of your box, then of course the box doubles down, because who wants to get out of their box, especially when somebody threatens the box? Because
then it's not okay.
That's the protector controller system for that individual, right? So instead, like acknowledging, okay, what do you do? Wow, awesome! You're so protected and controlling, and these things work, and building that rapport and intimacy somehow opens up that possibility then for that person to kind of stand back from that and see it for what it is, and then be in a more potential, or what would you say, an environment with greater potential to integrate new or other aspects of themselves, and or other approaches to what they're familiar with into their repertoire.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's I mean, when you were describing the different, let me call them feedback loops in this identifier, I kind of had the impression you were explaining what I call novelty production.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll need a little bit of explanation there. But so when I was researching creativity, we use this concept that you keep a lot of the patterns abstract. So you accept like that's gonna work, right? Like face recognition by software, that's gonna work. Let's accept that, and then see if that would work. How could you do something creative with that?
Mm-hmm.
And so you actually get like, because the way you talk about driver, and I've noticed that in S3, the way they talk about driver is the way I used to talk about driver in complex systems.
Mm-hmm.
And but when I first started using driver, I've bounced in that cultural wall that everyone else was using it in a different way. So I understand that if you come from the corporate world, the concept of a driver had a very different meaning.
Yeah.
But in a complex adaptive system, so you need to see it's about creativity. Before you get to creativity, you actually get to improper use. So you try to solve a problem. Maybe you don't have the tools around you. Maybe the tools around you don't work for the thing you're trying to do. So you start improperly using whatever you can do to, and that's start of the creative process. Yeah. And then you use that, and then you learn something from that, and then the box opens basically too. But that it's an interaction between your driver trying to solve something, the way you perceive it, and the way the environment responds to it. Mm-hmm. So those are all, again, those three angles you need for, and if you then see how that evolves over time, it kind of makes this back and forth movement. Like you're improving your models, so you're modeling, and then when you got good models, you start mastering them. And when you have when you mastered your models, it starts playing again with them, and you kind of zigzag your way to the new.
Yeah. So Snowden, I think you're summing up what Snowden recently changed from emergent practice to exactive discovery in the complex domain, right? It's like you take what you've got, and you said improper use, and through necessity, you adapt what you have somehow, re-synergize and discover something new. And over time, hopefully, if you survive long enough, you can cherry pick elements of value from that, and these over time become new practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With the thing I need to add to it is that once I had discovered that system, that feedback system, it popped up in environments I didn't expect it, and that kind of made me. That's how the whole, because I have an interdisciplinary PhD, so I'm actually a doctor in 5 domains. It's terrible, but the thing is that the feedback system popped up in domains we wouldn't associate with cognition.
Could you just give a summary of what you mean by
that? Yeah, I'm gonna give you a few, because first, like you mentioned, like you also need peers, mm-hmm. right? Well, there's another exactly similar feedback model that also look at peers, also look at politics, also look at public opinion, and that's by Bruno Latour, who actually questioned like how is the development of science and technology rooted in the social fabric. And when he started digging into that question, he actually came up with the same feedback system. And there are actually had 2 more discoveries of them. One comes from strategic management. So in strategic management, they started with the resource-based view, then they moved to capabilities. And then they question like, yeah, okay, but what if the environment is rapidly changing, right? How do we deal with dynamic capabilities? And then there is the dynamic capability framework of TEAS. It's a big thing in strategic management, but it's the same feedback system. And there is a debate that happened around 2011. So there was a debate in, you could say, agile methodology journals. And there was someone coming up with the concept of design science research. And someone responded with another paper like, well, that's just action research. That's just, we already know that methodology. It's just try, do, learn, and so on. And then there was like this fight over journals, saying like it's wrong, it's the same, it's different, and so on. And so that they came to the conclusion that it's different. So then someone tried to create a paper like, okay, so what would happen if we tried to combine those two, action research and design science research? And they came up with the same feedback system. So that same feedback system, and that's why I said like when you say at the interface between the habitual and the new, you have potential for greater consciousness. And that in my view, it's more true than you could imagine. This for me is the thing that is the evolution of consciousness that's happening right now. It's exactly. We are going meta.
Yeah, we wouldn't know who thinks it's more true, but I think it's pretty true too.
Yeah.
After 5 years of journeying with S3, this was my conclusion. Because people come to S3 looking for prescriptions and formulas outside of themselves because they finally concede what they have isn't good enough and they think S3 might help. And they're going to love it or hate it. At some point, they're probably going to love it first and hate it. But the point for me with S3 is the realization it's not about S3. That's just a really, really clumsy, low resolution way of describing some pretty cool fundamental patterns that guide life's unfolding day to day and us as expressions of life. So it's like we're just waking up in a very kind of low resolution way to that wisdom that is already woven into the fabric of our being and guides our perpetuation moment by moment somehow. But what I've observed is that more important than whether the pattern itself is relevant or not, the volition to experiment with something different to what you do or what you're familiar with, through motivated by perceived need and the willingness to try, will inevitably facilitate a coming into greater consciousness of the habitual ways of doing things, through that disidentification process. So whether it turns out that the alternative way of doing it or not is more appropriate or more valuable isn't really the point. The point is now you're standing like in embrace of how you previously did things with some consciousness now and another way of doing things. And by holding that tension between opposites, you now have a more conscious position from which to choose rather than choice appearing to have agency over choice, but really just acting out of your habitual way of doing things and then justifying it later as having made sense in some way. And so this is what I've been observing with S3 is that people are now, they're faced with themselves, they're faced with the systems that they're in, they're awakening to the habitual ways of doing things. And once they get past the false and rather naive idea that S3 is going to save them somehow, or at least they can reject it as something dysfunctional and useless, that actually it's much more complex than that. And what's required might be something that needs to be discovered through that process of, how did you put it? The exactive discovery, improper use, of a synergy.
Did you just call it exactation?
Snowden referred to it as exactive discovery.
Oh, did he pick it up? Oh, that's great. Yeah. You need to know that acceptation is a pretty old evolutionary concept.
Yeah.
And the best case we know, the example we always give are feathers, but bones are another example. So both bones and feathers have evolved in a certain niche, but then suddenly like they create like this leverage to a whole new world, because feathers were created for mating and for warmth, but then they turn out to be great for flight. And the same is with bones. Our bones in the very early days of sponge, you actually see that it is a rare resource, and they had to safely store it inside where they couldn't be reached.
Mm-hmm.
And but then it was hard structure, and then it started being used for motion. So
yeah,
both of them are called exaptations. So not adaptations. Adaptation, that's like more linear. Exaptation is like billiard ball hitting the side and then getting back.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at my, I think it's like the sixth sentence in my PhD talks about exaptation, because there are some researchers also in business, in innovation that have been picking up the concept of exaptations, and that's 15 years ago. So
yeah,
so I'm happy to hear that it's getting popularized. Yeah. Sorry for my enthusiasm.
We're nearly at the time we set, and I'm not sure we got to what it was that you were wishing for from the call today. So maybe if we just kind of come back to that, I never got the outcomes you were looking for, but maybe we can see if we can nail something around that before we wrap up.
Cool, that's a good question. First of all, I think that what I was looking for was having a relevant, interesting discussion about a topic that's hard to have a relevant discussion with a lot of people around me. So, I think that maybe one of the reasons I contacted you was that I've been collaborating with the local agile community working on S3. But my interest is, of course, is to get into this architectural part of it, the trying to help the complex adaptive systems around it. And I've noticed that I can't get like an entry by going local. So if I was trying to talk about the more advanced ideas behind S3, that wasn't really they had concrete problems in their organization and they want to work on that. And it was a very useful exercise to try out the patterns, because otherwise how could I actually have some experience on the patterns? But it didn't allow me to go to the next step, which is what I call participation research. And but I didn't expect to directly after one talk to get anything out there. So I just wanted to figure out if there is something underlying there, if there is a shared interest, and I guess there is. So well, I think related to expectations, it's exceeded.
Yeah. Great. Well, I feel like this conversation could go on all day and all night for a few days. I felt a lot of resonance with what
Can I have one anecdote to finish with? Because that's a like really useful one. When I organized the conference in 2006 with the founder of Drupal, we actually had a talk of 2 hours at the bar. And there was one person coming along who wanted a picture with the founder. And we were like surprised because no one ever asked that question in me. There was a startup project who was great as a strange thing. Fast forward to 2012 in Amsterdam. I normally after the keynote talk to him for whatever time we get. But now we had like 5 minutes. And in the 5 minutes, we were interrupted 7 times because someone wanted a picture with him. And you see how the system itself can kind of get like a golden cage around you. Yeah. So I just want to make the anecdote related to the tropical cascades. You very often see that you try to create something beautiful, but before you know it, it can turn pretty ugly.
Yeah, I think I find some overlap in that story with mine and Lily's experience of last year. So we've been on the road teaching S3. We've been learning about S3, obviously, as we share with others about it. And that's been extremely useful. But the last year or so, we weren't able to do much else because of the increasing demand to learn and our travel schedule. And meanwhile, there's so much documentation required and just ways of kind of transmitting what we've learned so that others can access that without the dependency on us. And COVID was a great leveler for that, because it stopped us along with everyone else dead in their tracks. And for me, besides the vulnerabilities of the future and letting go of our kind of way of sustaining ourselves at that moment, it created this amazing opportunity to get into to resource development instead. And what's come out of that, we're working on e-learning, not as quickly as I would hope, actually, because that's a lot of writing, and writing collaboratively is also a lot of talking and a lot of learning and unlearning and thinking too. But we've also now launched the beta version of this S3 online learning community, which is running September to December. And that's awesome. We got 50 people, most of them with a reasonable experience of S3 in different organizational contexts, coming together regularly for peer learning and sessions with us, and a nice platform, a digital platform in this case, but nonetheless, a lot of conversations and people posting articles of their experiences and so on. I think that it's like we melted down that golden cage and utilized that in a manner that's, for now at least, proving to be much more appropriate to the context. And I was thinking it would be great at some point, we'll be having speakers who would love to come and share, and also, maybe run a session with some of the members to answer some questions and so on. But it would be awesome to invite you there next year at some point, if you'll be up for that, because I think your area of interest and experience would be super appropriate. And I'll probably share this conversation there as well. I think that would be useful for people. And maybe that's a place, albeit a virtual environment, where you can have some of those deeper conversations with people as well.
Yeah, I think I would love to actually have another talk when possible, because the thing we end up now could be a whole discussion on itself.
Sure.
I just wanted to let you know that the way I validated my PhD is by creating an e-learning peer review platform, where I proved that normally one person could supervise 30 projects. I demonstrated how one person could supervise 300 projects. So it's project-oriented education that creates more tension on coaching, but then actually show how to scale the coaching with collective intelligence. And that's a project it has run in 2012. That's the thing I was selling in China. We wanted to implement it there with a whole university, but yeah, that's what, when my university is there, whoa, stop.
Yeah,
they were
out of business.
Yeah, they were. It was way too disruptive to all the structure they created, because one of the things is the way they actually claim they need assistance for research is saying that they need them for education.
Yeah,
I can come along and show that you can actually solve that with the technology.
Yeah.
So I would be interested to learn more on what you're trying to do with e-learning, but for another time, right?
Yeah, sure. We'll tell you what we're trying to do, and you can tell us how to do it.
Yeah, well, there it is. So suddenly the participation is evident there, right? So I would be happy to.
Great.
Thank you, James.
You too, Mixel. Real
Yes,
pleasure. Man. Thanks a lot. You brightened up my day, and lots to think about.
Same here. Thank you.
Yeah, and send me any links you think are useful, and we'll arrange a time to get together again soon.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Cheers.